Poor households tend to be non-white and live in urban centers. But why? Well, two reasons likely explain the latter. First, the way most cities develop allows for cheaper housing units to be supplied than would occur in rural and suburban areas. Also, cities tend to benefit from agglomerated social service provision, meaning that comprehensive government aid like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or SNAP, aka food stamps, cash assistance, and housing vouchers are easier to access in densely populated cities used to serve thousands of people. You see, government policy is actually very important for mitigating the effects of poverty. At one point in time, President Lyndon B. Johnson, under his administration's Great Society initiatives, tried to declare a war on poverty, which gave us the Medicare and Medicaid programs we're familiar with today. Medicaid, like temporary assistance for needy families or TANF, SNAP, and Section 8, is part of our fabric of welfare programs in the United States. They're meant to alleviate poverty for millions of Americans. Most of the US's poor participate in what are called means tested programs, or programs that you can qualify for only if your means are low enough. In other words, programs you only qualify for if you meet certain measures of poverty, which can include income, but also assets like savings account balances. Government aid can take two major forms: cash and non cash assistance. Cash assistance is less common because policymakers and voters, especially in the US, tend to be wary of giving cash to the poor. Still, programs like TANF are technically cash assistance programs and are rationally preferred by the poor, since cash allows people to create the best kind of budget to serve their needs. On the other hand, non cash assistance like SNAP, Medicaid, or Section 8 housing vouchers make up an important part of the US government's aid to the poor. In New York City, NYCHA housing is another example of non cash assistance. But has our distrust of the poor become a pillar of the welfare system? In the 1980s and 1990s, LBJ's vision of a great society without poverty was largely considered a failure, despite the programs having made significant headway in reducing poverty among the elderly and the children. The general consensus on both sides of the aisle was that welfare was too generous in developing dependency among participants. The Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996 restructured welfare in the United States to be more strict with employment requirements and time limits. While the welfare reform in the mid 1990s did slash welfare caseloads, it's now understood that most of the women who fell off of the welfare rolls didn't land a job without poverty, but instead fell further into poverty. This makes sense since the traits that we often see among the poor, like low educational attainment and spotty employment records, are traits that could also keep someone structurally unemployed. And yes, it's true that many of the US's poor are jobless, but many of the US's almost 40 million poor are also children or retirement age, sick or disabled caretakers of family, in school full time. The unemployed who could actually search for work only make up a fraction of the people who are in welfare or in poverty. So one may conclude that requiring work to get access to government aid wouldn't help the poor get out of poverty. And from what we can tell, such is the case. Among developed nations, the US is currently one of the worst at reducing poverty rates with its tax and transfer system. This is the case even after considering our earned income tax credit, often heralded as one of the best anti-poverty tools in our tax system. Inefficiencies in our tax system partially explain poverty in the US, along with factors similar to those that explain income inequality: a growing prevalence of female-headed households, and widening wage gap between high and low-skilled laborers. Arguably, more generous cash assistance might at least lift more households out of poverty and reduce the rate of poverty. Welfare programs make up a small fraction of the US's annual federal budget, and it seems that these programs only do so much to lift people out of poverty. If cash could do it, you may naturally ask, why are we so distrustful of the poor in the US that non-cash assistance is often a preferred form of help? Well, it may help to remember that the poor in the US are disproportionately single women of color. For decades, politicking around poverty has involved using women of color as the face of poverty, especially when it came to criticism from conservatives. This is commonly known as the welfare queen trope. Understanding why the welfare queen stereotype of women of color existed and how it could have contributed to making the welfare system in the US less efficient requires understanding discrimination in the US, which we'll talk about next.